this episode, I want to talk about the decline, or some might say the death of R&B.
My mind's telling me no.
Is R&B dead in 2022? In this episode, I want to find out what happened to R&B music. These days, modern day R&B groups don't even exist. They've been replaced with this. Pop artists sing over bass-heavy beats, or rappers sample R&B songs, or just completely auto-tune vocals over beats. You know, like Kanye, Lil Wayne, and Drake. You used to call me on my... You used to. The line between R&B and hip-hop is completely gone. The mainstream charts consider it one genre now. So what really happened? Most people today don't even listen to traditional radio anymore. I mean, when's the last time you turned on the radio? But this is where I started my research, because this was my intro to R&B music as a kid. Falling asleep to the Quiet Storm on Hot 103 Jams, or as we would say, Hot 103 Jams, and don't forget to slam that Z. The Quiet Storm, WHUR, was voiced by Melvin Lindsay. This is where R&B found a permanent home.
11:43 in Washington. Wow, 17 minutes before midnight and 17 minutes before my end of reigning with the Quiet Storm here at WHUR Radio.
You didn't even have to have a radio in D.C. All you had to do was open the window. You couldn't help but hear the Quiet Storm. That's how popular it was. It was the air that D.C. breathed.
The Quiet Storm was a nice slowdown where you can just listen to music and just kind of just escape and just vibe out.
The Quiet Storm was birthed on the campus of Howard University. During the 1970s and into the 80s, artists like Anita Baker, Marvin Gaye, Luther Vandross, they all shaped the sound of the post-civil rights era. Some of the biggest artists and some of the biggest stars in music were influenced by the blues genre, which eventually evolved into rhythm and blues. And you can't really forget about the black church.
What's in name? What's in name? What's in name? You have to be good. Like, you don't have a choice, or else you just don't get up there, you know. So that's why some of the great singers like Aretha or like Whitney or like so many came out of church, because we hear it all the time. And it's others that you haven't heard that probably equally as good that you will never.
So as we flow from the 70s into the 1980s, you can see the change and the evolution of R&B music, from all the different types of lead singers and stars that were popping up during the 80s. In 1980, Dewey and Kathy Hughes purchased one of DC's most popular radio stations, WOL. Kathy Hughes had already proven success in the radio industry after launching The Quiet Storm on WHUR, Howard University's radio, as well as WYCB, a gospel station. A few years later, Kathy Hughes went on to launch one of the most famed black radio institutions in the United States, Radio 1. So if black radio is the platform for R&B music to thrive, what happened to all the black radio stations? Short answer, they were bought out. Some were bought out by black operated family owned companies and were just consolidated down. So like here in California, you might have 2 black owned radio stations in the entire state. And what I've seen and what I've read is that, you know, that mirrors what's happening across other states, where you might have one station that's still black operated, and they might play jazz, or it might be a little talk radio, but it doesn't have the buying power that a Cumulus radio or iHeart Radio would have to, you know, buy or get strong artists into those stations, or get that kind of music rotation that you would hear on your normal everyday radio stations. So if we only own 1 to 2% of all radio stations, who really owns all the rest of the stations? It can be boiled down to just a handful of corporate companies. Like I mentioned, iHeartRadio, Cumulus, EMIS, Disney. So how many black-owned radio stations are still in existence? Currently, there are 168 of 10,315 commercial AM and FM stations in the United States. These stations are concentrated in the South and are distributed among 30 states, according to Google. Another question, why are there no radio stations that support R&B? Okay, so here are the 6 specific devices the FCC used to maintain segregation of the airwaves. The FCC and its predecessor, the Federal Radio Commission outright refused to grant radio station licenses to African Americans because of their race and religion until World War II. The FCC used its licensing power to facilitate the schemes of segregated state university systems to exclude minorities from equal access to broadcast education. The FCC licensed and relicensed open segregationists, thereby preventing minorities from gaining a foothold in commercial broadcast employment for generations. The FCC used absurdly stringent financial qualification requirements to keep minorities out of the comparative licensing process. The FCC repeatedly ignored a court decision that required it to take minority ownership impact into account when considering technical radio allotment and allocation issues. And lastly, the FCC adopted a broadcast equal employment opportunity rule, but then failed to this day to meaningfully enforce it or even measure whether it had any impact. Okay, so even if you remove radio from the conversation, TV stations like BET and classic shows like Soul Train and Video Soul was the home for the genre also. Soul Train during the 70s was the only show to cater to the black audience. But with the decline of BET and shows like Soul Train, you also see the decline of the music. No dedicated weekly shows where artists could get interviewed and promote new albums. No weekly top 10 countdowns. There's no real platforms left for R&B music to thrive. Another factor that I would say would contribute to the decline in R&B music is pretty much the content. Look at today's music versus, say, the 2000s or the 90s. The content of the music has clearly changed.
You bring an artist to a company, one, you got to have 3-4 million streams already. And with that comes $65 million, like Cardi B is getting a single. All right. Okay. Now, if you just come with an artist that can sing today and go talk about you're not getting signed. You will get like Jill Scott right now. I'm not trying to say anything bad. She can't get $25,000 right now for marketing or a record or anything from a company like Universal.
Now, this is just my opinion, but this is what makes up a good R&B song. First, you need a lead singer.
I'm rolling down a lonely highway.
Some harmony.
Please, we come back to the days. Can we come back, baby?
Strong vocals.
Run away. Do we separate? Oh.
Definitely a slow, smooth beat with a slow tempo. And then you might even add a strong dancer or just a strong performer in general. Think Michael Jackson, Beyonce, and even today, Chris Brown. Another piece to the puzzle is the missing R&B groups. The record labels stopped funding and creating traditional R&B groups. The last real R&B group that kind of existed and had any kind of popularity was Day 26. R&B groups declined. Arista terminated Boyz II Men's contract on April 30th, and the remaining 3 members took a temporary hiatus from the music industry. So modern day boy bands evolved from barbershop quartets. Whether it was NSYNC, 98 Degrees, or Backstreet Boys, Lou Pearlman, the creator of these groups, probably wouldn't admit that he probably copied, Boyz II Men. But Boyz II Men was a heavy influence of most of these pop groups.
Band put together by record producer Lou Pearlman.
Hey, we signed a contract. Let's move forward and let's make a lot of money together and let's make this thing happen.
It is a hit maker.
But why R&B? Why has R&B been hit so hard?
Possibly, I don't think it gets enough respect. I don't think that rhythm and blues music gets enough respect. You see pop music everywhere. You're not going to see a bunch of R&B videos, not very often. The most popular stations don't really show that too often. Maybe once every 3 or 4 hours, not like pop music or hip hop.
Another reason for R&B's decline is the hip hop and R&B have fused into a single genre. 2008 was probably the year that pushed R&B off the cliff, in my opinion. During that year, you had T-Pain, love him or hate him, but he's a pivotal moment for R&B. Kanye West dropped 808s and Heartbreak, which influenced artists like Drake. And then you have artists like Chris Brown, who started out as R&B artists, but then later in their career merged into more rap/R&B artists. So in conclusion, will R&B music ever reach the heights of the 90s, the 80s, or the 70s again? I don't think so, but there will always be a space for R&B, whether it's on streaming platforms, concerts. I think there's always going to be a spot for R&B, classic R&B or modern R&B. Shout out to all the new artists that are, you know, trying to keep the R&B sound alive, but it's a battle.